Welcome back to the Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So we're stepping into what I guess we can call a regular episode after really diving in to our Your Part series with some really lovely people, some hearts and souls and minds that we shared with. We're also stepping into a particular moment in time, which is curious to consider. It's our 25th episode today.
In the world of tens, 25s and 50s carry great significance, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting to consider how we measure, how we carry, how we look at it symbolically, and also then how it feels in our reality of change. And I would offer that from an inner state that things change is true. Quite often our society goes, there's the timeline, there's this way that we have to do things. And 25 episodes for us, 2 every month, actually means that we're coming up on the podcast having been public for a year. But for us, we've been recording episodes for a little over a year now. We started in April of 2024. And now it's May 1st, 2025, as we're recording, and you're listening sometime in the future. So this concept of time is something that we've brought to the table in a lot of ways over the course of our journey of becoming podcasters, right? Of bringing healing and growth into this media. Something that we haven't talked about so much is time as it relates to personal practice. You know, from a soulful place, what does that feel like in relation to the concept that our society loves to bow down to?
The notion that we're starting in conversation here with, it lands in me with, in this moment, as the realization that at any given moment, I'm either practicing being in presence or I'm not here. When I've used that phrasing, referencing the notion that either I'm not here or because of someone's suffering within their anxiety or their frustrations, they're not here. Sometimes folks receive it as something they can really conceptually understand, right? They may not have that practice, but they conceptually get it. Other times, if it hits a personal place in them, I get a reaction, as if I'm being critical. It's intended to bring awareness to our state of being. Either we're here or we're someplace else. That's just a simple reality to it all. And when we're someplace else while occupying this space, it creates a lot of tension in us because we're split. We're split between being physically here and having our minds in one or often many other places. And when we end up in those many other places with our minds, our thoughts, our feelings jumping around away from what's right here, right now, a conversation, in this case, between you and I, it creates such a tension in us, a kind of underlying kind of buzz, that it actually internally affects our concept of time. When I was a little boy, I remember a different kind of tension. I was sitting in my sixth grade class with my sixth grade teacher and all my fellow students, Miss Humphreys, a marvelous woman, an extraordinary teacher. And in many ways, school for me in that time was a sanctuary. There was more space for me to be me. So therefore, it was someplace I often would in the more open spaces of what class offered, maybe while I was reading or whatever, I would ponder what was in the future. I would ponder what adulthood looked like. And I sought unwittingly what I was seeking was agency. I was seeking empowerment. I didn't know that. I felt squashed by what home life felt like. And in the context of school, that sense of What would it look like if I got to make the decisions? If I got to choose? From age 12 in Miss Humphrey's class until I really started to feel that sense of I have choices, it was only 4 years away. I remember it feeling very different at age 16. At that point, I was driving a car. I had choices I could make around what and how I would conduct my life. And yet, in the midst of it all, because of my own habituated patterns, my own wounded and traumatized self, a lot of my activity was filled with the anxieties, the worries, the frustrations. And so that accelerated time even further. And that really took me on a journey where, in large measure, I dwelled for the next several decades in this highly accelerated place. And it would really only be with the beginning of acupuncture school, there was awareness, but not yet the full depth of practice. And as I moved into my 40s, practice began to shift things. And then at a certain point, the practice became embodied, the sense of practicing presence. Not that I always did it well, but I was practicing with it. And I've come over time to this recognition that my experience of time, and I believe the experience of time for most human beings, is radically different depending upon the degree to which we're present to the moment. That time, in fact, not just in our minds, but I believe time in an deeply experienced sense shifts radically when we're not filling all of the in betweens with anxiety, worry, frustration, deep sadness, that when there's space of stillness in between, time radically changes. And that's been my experience, that as I continue to deepen my own inner practice and my experience of what it feels like to be just simply to be me, that spaciousness combined with a sense of agency, of empowerment, has been felt in ways that has allowed me to feel that sense of empowerment and agency while at the same time as well experiencing a sense of ease. This morning, a client walks in early this morning for a session, and the first thing he says is, "Time's moving so fast." And it was very clear that he was anxious, he was frustrated, he was very, he really kind of, he had the trifecta of embodying anxiety, worry, and frustration all in one big bundle, right? Kind of flashing back and forth, right? And so we talked, he settled, and there was this recognition that, yeah, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in this individual's life. We're in the midst of spring with all the rising energy that comes with that can often feel very full in its nature. So, yeah, talk about agency. Yeah. And I think there's another element to it as well, which is that when that in between time, in other words, when we fill life up with whatever it may be, non present aspects of self, we can often falsely, I think inwardly, there's a false notion to the idea that by filling all of our time, by doing, we're enhancing, we're increasing, we're furthering our sense of agency, of our sense of empowerment in the world. And in some ways, my experience is that there's little opportunity for the spaciousness that's needed to sustain over time a healthy relationship to whatever goals we have in life, whatever our aspirations, our calling might be. And it's often that when those spaces are always filled with do, it often looks far more like ambition than calling. It feels more like ambition than calling. Not to negate ambition inherently, but to discern between a sense of calling in life rather than expressing it through a sense of ambition. Does that come across clear to you, Ben?
It absolutely is. What I hear you speak of is the ambition becomes a concept. It isn't a part of the action. It isn't a part of the practice. It's a concept. So, like time, it's there to fill the space. And it becomes a part of the striving, the notion of success. All of these things that are wonderful kernels, wonderful ideas, wonderful seeds. But to really actually talk about seeds, we can hold the seeds in our hands and we can say, this seed is of a zucchini, this seed is of a tomato. They will never be those things unless we choose to take action, unless we live in that ambition and we go out to our garden and we plant them. And so that is a very literal, real thing, a real choice to make. And I say that thinking about our garden, visualizing our raised beds in our backyard where we get amazing sun and we get great exposure to water, to rain when it happens. And the soil itself is very rough and rugged. So we've had to do these raised beds. I share all of those aspects because it's about going, well, we have the space. We can't necessarily plant deep in this earth. It's really rooty and it's really hard soil and there's a lot of pebbles and rocks in it. But we do have the space. We have the yard to allow something else, something different. So this is a real thing that I'm speaking of, and I'm using it as a symbol, as a metaphor for our own inner space. We don't need to get so small and so compartmentalized with the worry, anxiety, and frustration. We're going to feel those things. And if we feel them in a space of abundance, in a space where there's nothing to fill up and just feel them, they're going to get integrated into the actions that we take. And if we're taking actions outside of presence, then they're just going to fall back into being a concept, into being compartmentalized rather than planted. Hi, everyone. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please consider visiting martinperkins.com for more healing and growth resources. Over there, you can check out the paperback and audiobook editions of Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity, the Language of the Soul 1-year course. The course is available both online and in person. Option 1 to taking Language of the Soul is a shared learning format where you and a group of your peers meet online or in person. Option 2 is a one-to-one format of mentee and mentor with acupuncture sessions included, while option 3 is just the one-to-one mentor-mentee. As burgeoning podcasters, the greatest gift you can offer Martin and I is to share this podcast with just one person. Word of mouth remains the most genuine way to share the art and media that you love and care about. So in advance, we thank you. And now, back to the conversation.
Ambition's defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a strong desire to do or to achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. And I think that when I speak of calling, I'm really speaking of how do I work with, yes, with determination, but smart work or,
Good work, right?
right, like work that feels like it's feeding us. When I hear hard work, I often hear, how do I override my needs in the moment so I can keep on doing this thing? Because I've got to get there no matter what the path is that I take to get there, I got to get there. That's what ambition feels for me and why I often use calling as an alternative.
Yeah, calling, purpose, practice, presence. These are not just words that we're batting back and forth like a tennis match. They really are, when I speak of them, I feel them in my guts, in my root, because I'm there. And like you noted earlier, not doing it well all the time, not doing it perfectly, hell, we really can't. Every moment's going to be different. And that's where I think ambition can get misconstrued. That's where the determination becomes the uphill battle, and where we're climbing that mountain and we're sweating and we're going, I gotta do it. And you don't have water and you don't have protection from the sun and you're not taking breaks. And it's that ascension culture myth that we will on occasion bring up and point back to.
And I think I'm also tapping into the sense of a more spiritual notion of calling.
Oh, yeah.
Calling is it contains truth, a sense that everything we are, everything we do, that if we invest in it, a sense of devotion, of dynamism, of a sense of direction, that life will meet us there. And so when I hear hard work, it's like I'll have to push, and I have ambition. I'm going to push my way there. It's instead of where does that sense of calling, that sense of vocation, where does life meet me? And I think that it's a softer place. And I think from that place, in response to a sense of purpose in our lives, there's a spaciousness that in truth allows time to exist within us in a way that we're not dwelling in the hustle and the bustle.
Absolutely. Time is our own.
Mm-hmm.
I just got back from a trip from New York City, and New York is often perceived as the epitome of the hustle and the bustle, right?
Right.
Why did I go to New York? Well, here in Richmond, the close friendships that I've made over the years that I've lived here, those folks have moved away. And while I am absolutely adept, and I think a lot of people would say really good at sustaining meaningful, long distance friendships, the importance of being in person with someone, of sharing that joy is a very important part of my calling.
Yes.
And so I have a lot of friends in New York, and I said, all right, I'm going to plan a trip to New York. And that reason to go to New York is to see various friends there. Now, other things happened, other lovely events and so forth happened, some with friends and without. But because I set that intention, because it was a part of that deeper spiritual calling of, I know that I want to connect with certain people, and here they are in a practical, our reality. I can afford to go to New York as opposed to Los Angeles or Berlin or Atlanta, even though that's not that far away, just in terms of train travel. New York is easier. And so I went there, and it might be funny to describe my 6 days and 7 nights in New York as being wonderfully peaceful. And it's because I had set that intention, because I was honoring that in each moment, meeting the moment
Mm-hmm.
and going, I'm here to be with friends. And sometimes that meant being on the subway. Sometimes that meant leaving the house and needing to get to the station on time and the train being late and people being frustrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I did a lot of the time on the subway when I had a seat, especially always when I had a seat, was I meditated. And when I stood, there was a sense of presence, of being in a space that I had been used to at a time when I lived there 15 years ago, but reacclimating to the hustle and bustle because you are on a subway car with 110 other people and it's, 12 p.m. and you go, wow, oh my gosh, there are those sensations that I experience in my body, in my mind, especially going, this is a lot. And because I had set an intention with this trip, because I was practicing with it every day, those moments that can be unnerving, those moments that can physically be a lot, well, I had the inner space to be at peace with that discomfort. And so the anxiety, the worry, the frustration, they just kind of floated on by for me. My relationship to time was my own. And the train could be early, it could be late, it could be crowded, but my relationship to myself and knowing that I was there and feeling joy and satisfaction in making that choice, right? You talk about a goal, you talk about ambition, the satisfaction of living that choice of saying, this is what I need, and honoring it and taking that trip and being with people that I love dearly meant that time, anxiety, how we perceive time to pass, the hustle and the bustle of New York was an interesting poem to read.
rather than a stressor.
Exactly.
If you'd like to find within yourself a sense of practice around learning to relate to your life, and as a result, the sense of pace in your life, the sense of how time is experienced within you, I encourage you to go to the free workshop that's offered titled Building Resilience in a Changing World. It's a 3-part series in which we give the foundational framework for the very relationship to yourself that we're talking about today as we frame it around our experience of time.
That's available over on youtube.com/at language of the soul. That's an at symbol, at language of the soul. Always a pleasure to dive back into this space with you, my friend. You know, we've been trying something new with the Your Part series, and this just resonates from that space. All these things are shared in this way. There's synchronicity, there's a quality of just sharing feelings and ideas and experiences that is great with other people, but it's always so much fun just to get back to the basics.
Amen.
Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.